They threw him out in front of everyone. Not loudly, that was the thing. It was done quietly, the way people do things when they are certain they are correct. A hand gesture toward the exit, a lowered voice, a smile that technically qualified as polite. He stood up. He folded his daughter's drawing. She had pressed the crayon so hard that morning that the paper had torn, and put it in his jacket pocket. He said nothing. He walked to the door. Nobody in that room asked a single question about the man they had just removed. That was their mistake, because the man they removed had a name, and that name was on a plaque, right there, on the wall, behind the table where they were still sitting. It had been there for 11 years. Kane Rourke was 59 years old, and he moved through the world the way people do when they have learned, at considerable cost, that most of it is not paying attention. He woke at 5 every morning in a house in Silver Lake that was too big for 2 people and too full of specific memories to ever feel empty. He made coffee. He packed a lunch. He checked the schedule he wrote out by hand every Sunday night on a yellow legal pad because he did not trust apps to remind him of the things that actually mattered. Then he drove his 2009 Ford F-150 to Glendale Elementary and dropped off his daughter Maya before the first bell. The truck was not a poverty statement. It was not affectation. His younger sister Danny had sat in the passenger seat of that truck the last morning of her life, drinking a gas station coffee and arguing about whether a hot dog qualified as a sandwich. He was not going to get rid of it. That was all. Maya was 8 years old. She had dark eyes and a way of tilting her head when she was thinking that her mother had done too, though Maya would not have known that. She had been 11 months old when Danny died. She had been calling Kane Dad since she was 3, the first time without prompting, and neither of them had ever discussed whether that was the right word. It was simply the word that fit. She carried a sketchbook everywhere, not because anyone encouraged her to. Kane had never pushed her toward art or anything else, but because she seemed to need it, the way some kids need a stuffed animal or a particular song. She drew things that did not look like anything recognizable and then explained them with complete seriousness. The drawing she had made that morning was, according to Maya, a race car that was also a bird. It had 12 wheels. Kane had not pointed out the anatomical complications. He had a friend named Preston Cole, who ran an automotive restoration shop on Fletcher Drive and had the rare quality of being able to sit in a garage in comfortable silence for 2 hours and then say exactly the right thing and then go back to silence again. Preston was 52, had a gray beard he trimmed without enthusiasm, and was the only adult in Maya's life besides Kane who she did not address with excessive formality. She called him Press. She had decided this herself at age 5, and it had never been renegotiated. The neighborhood around Waverly Avenue, where Kane lived, was the kind of street where houses sat close together and people walked their dogs slowly and made unintentional eye contact. It was not a famous street. It was not a street that showed up in magazine profiles. That was precisely why Kane had chosen it. His neighbor to the north was a woman named Celeste Harmon. She was 44, worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a white Range Rover she parked at a precise angle to the curb, and maintained the kind of front garden that communicated standards without saying so directly. She and Kane had exchanged perhaps 60 words in the 2 years since she had moved in. She had once suggested, at a neighborhood association meeting, that certain properties on the block were bringing down the overall character of the street. She had not looked at Kane when she said it. She had not needed to. He had looked at her for a moment and then looked back at the agenda sheet in his hand. She had interpreted this as social defeat. He had interpreted it as the only reasonable response to a sentence that did not deserve the dignity of a reply. What Celeste Harmon did not know about Kane Rourke, what almost nobody on Waverly Avenue knew, was the particular architecture of the life he had built before he moved there. She knew he drove an old truck. She knew he picked up his daughter from school. She had seen him once, carrying groceries from the passenger seat, wearing a flannel shirt with a small paint stain near the second button. She did not know that he had spent 31 years working in front of a camera, that his name was on the poster of 16 films that had collectively earned more than $4 billion at the box office, or that he had quietly redirected a very specific portion of that money over many years into places where it could do work that did not require his name attached to it. She did not know any of this because Kane did not mention it, not from false modesty, from simple disinterest in the conversation it would start. He had stopped going to industry events a long time ago, not dramatically. He had not made an announcement or written a public letter. He had simply, one season, found that he did not want to go, and he had stopped going, and nobody had said anything that required a response. He still worked. He chose carefully. He showed up on set the way he showed up everywhere, present, quiet, prepared, and slightly more patient than the situation seemed to require. It was Preston who first mentioned the salvage auction. They were in the garage on a Friday evening, eating sandwiches, while Maya did her homework at the workbench, her sketchbook open beside the math worksheet in a way that suggested the math was losing. Preston had heard from a contact that a private collection was being liquidated out of a storage facility in Burbank, an estate settlement. The executor needed the lot cleared by the following Wednesday. 40-something vehicles, mostly unremarkable. Kane said he would go Saturday morning. Preston said, "You're not going to find anything." Kane said, "Probably not." He went anyway. That was the thing about him. He went anyway. The facility was operated by a man named Gerald Tatum, who had been running estate and salvage auctions for 27 years and had the delivery of a man who priced everything by gut and trusted the gut completely. He was 63, wore the same canvas vest every day regardless of temperature, and said exactly as many words as a transaction required and not one more. Kane walked the back rows alone. He had told Gerald he was just looking. Gerald had said, "Take your time," which was the most expansive thing Kane had ever heard him say. The car was in the last row, backed against a concrete dividing wall, half in shadow. It was a two-door coupe, or it had been, once. The paint was gone in most places, reduced to bare metal and scattered patches of what might have been dark green or might have been black, depending on the light. The roof had some surface rust along the seams. One headlight housing was missing entirely. Kane stopped when he saw it. He could not have explained to anyone why he stopped. It was not the condition. The condition was bad. It was the shape, the proportions of it. The wheelbase was longer than it had any right to be for the body size. The angle of the windshield was sharper than anything he had seen in standard production from that period. The rear wheel arches had a curve that did not come from a stamping die. He could see that without touching. Somebody had thought about this car for a very long time. He put his hand on the rear quarter panel without making a conscious decision to do so. The metal was cold. Through the grime and the surface oxidation, he could feel the bodywork, not pressed, not stamped by machine, but shaped and finished by hand. It was a subtle difference. To someone who had spent 30 years around vehicles the way Kane had spent them. Not as a hobby he had never mentioned in interviews, because it was too real to share. The difference was unmistakable. Gerald appeared at the end of the row. "That one's $150. Take it today or it goes to the crusher Thursday." Kane stood still for a long moment. He thought about the electricity bill. He thought about Maya's tuition payment due the following week. He thought about the fact that he could not articulate, under any reasonable cross-examination, why he was standing in a salvage lot in Burbank at 8:45 in the morning, with his hand on a rusted car he knew nothing about. In this case, he paid the $150. When he opened the driver's door to check the interior before arranging the tow, a fragment of a decal peeled away from the lower edge of the door frame and drifted to the ground. He picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket without examining it. He would look at it later. He did not know why that felt important. It did. The tow home was slow and slightly undignified. Preston's flatbed trailer, the chain, the coupe drifting behind at 12 miles an hour, with its dead steering requiring constant minor corrections. They turned onto Waverly Avenue at 9:53 in the morning. By the time they reached Kane's driveway, there were at least 5 people watching from various distances. The couple across the street on their porch. A woman walking a terrier who had simply stopped walking. 2 teenagers on skateboards who had paused mid-street to observe. Celeste Harmon was at her front gate. Kane did not see her immediately. He had his attention on guiding the trailer. but he heard her clearly. She was speaking to the woman beside her, a neighbor from 3 houses down, and she was not speaking quietly. I genuinely cannot tell if he's serious or if this is some kind of art installation. She paused. The poor kid, growing up watching her father drag junk home like this. Kane put the truck in park. He got out. He walked to the back of the trailer and began unfastening the chain from the tow hitch, working methodically, without hurry. Maya had come out the front door when she heard the truck. She was standing at the edge of the driveway in her socks. She had forgotten shoes. With her sketchbook under one arm, she heard what Celeste said. Kane could see from the slight stillness that moved through his daughter's shoulders that she had heard it. Maya looked at Celeste for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at the car. She tilted her head the way she did when she was thinking. He hesitated inside to get her shoes. Then she turned and went inside to get her shoes. Kane finished unhooking the chain. He did not look at Celeste. He did not feel the need to. That night, after Maya was asleep, Kane went to work. He set up 2 LED work lamps in the garage, put the small radio on the shelf between the ratchet sets and the socket organizers, and began cleaning the car methodically. From the bottom up, from the back forward, slowly enough to see what he was dealing with. A solvent cloth on the floor of the driver's footwell brought away decades of grime in long gray sheets. Underneath, stenciled into the bare metal of the floor pan, was a chassis number. He looked at it for a long time. It was not a format he recognized. The prefix was 7 characters, beginning with the letters E, R, and A, followed by a 2-digit number and 2 more letters. He photographed it with his phone. He ran searches for 40 minutes and found nothing definitive in any public registry. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the decal fragment from the door frame. He held it under the work lamp. Most of it was gone. The adhesive had dried to nothing over the decades, and the paper had dissolved at the margins. What remained was a portion of a logo, a stylized wheel, and beside it, something that had once been a graphic mark of some kind. Precise, confident, not decorative. It had not been made to ornament a streetcar. He taped the fragment carefully to a clean index card and went inside. Preston came over the next morning before the coffee was finished because Kane had called him at 6:40 and said only, "Come look at something." Preston was under the car on a rolling creeper for 6 full minutes without speaking. When he came out, he sat up slowly and looked at Kane with the expression of a man who is trying not to jump to a conclusion he very much wants to jump to. "The frame has been hand-reinforced," he said, "not factory. Someone welded additional gusseting at every major junction point. That is not a weekend project. That is months of skilled work by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." He walked to the front of the car and leaned into what remained of the engine bay. He stayed there for a long moment. When he straightened up, his voice was more careful. "Kane, the block has been machined, bored out and machined by hand. This is not a catalog engine. This was built for something specific, and whoever built it had serious knowledge and serious money." Kane had already photographed the suspension geometry. The setup was wrong for a streetcar, specifically wrong in the way that indicated custom endurance race configuration. The springs had been fabricated, not sourced, made. That afternoon, Kane found a forum, an old text-heavy site with almost no photographs, populated by people who had been using the same usernames for 15 years and cared more about accuracy than traffic. Created an account. He uploaded photographs of the chassis number, the suspension components, the body lines, and the decal fragment. Described what he had found in plain, precise language and asked if anyone recognized any element of it. By the following morning, there were 53 replies. The forum members disagreed about most things. Several were certain this was a well-executed kit build from the early 80s, someone's ambitious project assembled from racing catalogs and salvaged components. Others were not certain. 3 members, who identified themselves as having professional backgrounds in motorsport documentation, were considerably less settled. One of them, posting under the name Heiser Trench, wrote, "If that chassis prefix is authentic, you are looking at something that has been on a list in this community for a long time, a very specific list." Another member sent a private message. It said, "Stop posting public photographs. I am not being dramatic. Trust me on this." Kane printed the thread and put it in a folder. That evening, Maya came into the garage after dinner and sat on the overturned plastic crate that was her usual observation post when she wanted to watch him work. She had her sketchbook and she was drawing something. She drew for a while without speaking. Then she said, "Does the car have a name?" Kane considered this. "Not yet." "You want me to pick one?" She looked at the car seriously. She looked at it for a long time with her head tilted slightly to the left as though the answer was in the shape of it rather than in any word. Then she said, "Dagger." Kane set down the polishing cloth. He was still for a moment. He looked at the rear quarter panel, at the way the body line cut back from the wheel arch with an angle that was sharp and precise and deliberate. He said, "That's a good name." He went back to work. Maya went back to drawing. On the fourth day, Kane was working on the B-pillar on the driver's side when he noticed the paint was thicker there than anywhere else. He took fine grit paper and began cutting through it carefully, treating the surface the way you treat something you are not certain you should be disturbing. Beneath the black, he found a layer of deep metallic red, a specific shade, slightly warm, not a standard production color. He worked more carefully, removing material in thin passes, examining what the passes revealed. And then, on the inner face of the pillar, hidden completely when the door was closed, he found it. A stamp, pressed directly into the steel, not a plate, not a sticker. A physical mark hammered into the metal with a die. A number, and beside it, a stylized signature. 3 letters connected, rendered in a design that had been deliberate and personal. He photographed it. He searched for 2 hours. At 1:30 in the morning, he found a match, a digitized archive of an automotive trade publication from 1981, a profile piece on an American endurance racing team that had operated out of the desert Southwest during the mid-70s and early 80s. The team was described as technically innovative beyond what was commercially viable at the time. The article mentioned, in 2 paragraphs near the end, that several prototype vehicles built by the team had been either destroyed or dispersed when the organization folded in 1984 following the death of its lead engineer. Among those vehicles, according to a brief inventory list in the article's footnotes, was a single development chassis, a test bed for a revolutionary endurance geometry that had never been raced in official competition, but whose design principles had, according to the article, quietly shaped the architecture of competitive endurance vehicles through the following decade. The prototype had last been documented at the team's facility in Albuquerque in the autumn of 1984. After that, nothing, no record, no auction, no confirmed destruction. The stamped signature belonged to a man named Arthur Colby. The article identified him as the team's chief engineer and lead fabricator. It also identified him, in a single sentence that appeared after his name, as having died in a testing incident in the spring of 1984. The team had been founded and owned by a man named Raymond Whitfield. Kane sat in the garage until the light under the door changed from black to gray to the thin pale color of early morning. Preston had not meant to tell anyone. He told his wife because he had been holding it for 48 hours, and it had become physically uncomfortable. His wife mentioned it to the woman across the alley while they were both taking out, told her husband, and also, somewhat inevitably, the man she talked to at the dog run on Tuesday mornings. By midweek, Waverly Avenue had achieved that particular state of collective suppressed knowledge in which everyone is aware of the same information and nobody is addressing it directly. 2 neighbors appeared at Kane's garage door with transparent pretexts. One needed to borrow a specific socket size. One was asking whether he had seen a lost parrot. Both of them looked past him at the car for as long as they could manage before Kane said, "Thank you," and moved to close the door. He covered the car with a gray canvas tarp after the second visit. Celeste heard the story in a version that had traveled through 4 people, which meant some of the precision had been lost but the essential shape remained. The version she heard was that the car Kane had brought home for $150 might be worth millions. She laughed when she heard it. She said it sounded like something from a reality television program. Then she went inside and opened her laptop. She searched Raymond Whitfield. She read for 25 minutes. She found photographs of a man in his late 60s, compact and white-haired, standing in a hangar that appeared to hold a private vehicle collection. She found a profile piece in a business publication from 3 years earlier that estimated his net worth at over $800 million, built from racing winnings in the 70s, early investment in automotive performance technology, and a collection of historic vehicles that had appreciated considerably over 40 years. At the bottom of the profile, almost in passing, was a note that said he had been quietly seeking for over a decade a prototype chassis from his early career that had been believed lost when his team disbanded. He had offered a finder's reward twice, publicly, and withdrawn it both times when nothing credible surfaced. Celeste closed the laptop. She stood at her kitchen window for a long time, looking at the gray canvas tarp in Kane's driveway. She knocked on his door the following afternoon. She was holding a bottle of olive oil and explaining that she had run out. Kane opened the door, listened to the explanation, and said, "I don't cook with olive oil." He closed the door, not rudely, simply with the quiet economy of a man who has decided exactly interaction has earned. She stood on the step for a moment, then walked back to her house. On the evening of the 5th day, an email arrived in the inbox connected to Kane's forum account. The sender's name was Valerie Oakes. Her title, listed in her signature, was Executive Assistant, Office of Raymond Whitfield. The message was 4 sentences. It said that her employer had become aware of the forum discussion and the photographs. It said that if Mr. Rourke was in possession of the vehicle he had described, Mr. Whitfield would very much like to meet with him. It said that a meeting could be arranged within 24 hours at Mr. Rourke's convenience. It asked him to confirm. Kane read it 3 times at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface. Then he went to the garage, sat on the plastic crate, and called Preston. "Are you awake? It's 9:15. I got a message from Raymond Whitfield's office." There was a pause. "Say that again." Kane said it again, slower. A longer pause. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet." He looked at the tarp. "I wanted to tell someone first." "You told the right person," Preston said. "Now call Valerie Oakes and tell her tomorrow works." The 6th morning was a Saturday. Kane woke at 5, made coffee, packed Maya's breakfast even though there was no school, because the routine was the structure of their days, and he did not dismantle structure without a reason. He put on a dark blue flannel shirt that had no visible damage. He was briefly aware of how this decision appeared from the outside. He did not reconsider. Maya asked over breakfast, "Is someone coming today?" "Maybe." She looked at him. "Is Dagger going to stay?" Kane looked at his daughter for a moment. "Let's see what happens," he said. Preston arrived at 8:45 without being invited, because he understood that some things require a witness. He brought coffee in a paper carrier and had the expression of a man who has a quiet, private bet and is trying not to show it. The dark green SUV pulled to the curb at precisely 10 o'clock. Kane was already standing in the driveway. From her front window, 3 houses north, Celeste Harmon watched the vehicle arrive. She had been at the window for 20 minutes. Her coffee was cold. Raymond Whitfield did not look like a man who was accustomed to being surprised. He was 68 years old, compact, with white hair, cut close to his head, and hands that had the particular look of decades of mechanical work. Not soft, not decorative. His assistant Valerie came in behind him with a portfolio under one arm, and behind her, a man in a gray suit who Kane placed immediately as legal. Raymond walked directly toward the garage. He stopped when he saw the tarp. He did not wait for Kane. He walked to the tarp and looked back at Kane. Kane nodded. Raymond reached out and pulled the tarp back slowly, the way you remove something you are not certain you are ready to see. He stood very still. His hands, at his sides, were not moving. He walked around the car, both hands extended at intervals, fingertips occasionally touching the surface. He said nothing. Kane stood near the garage door and did not speak. Preston was just inside the garage entrance, occupying the position of someone who is present without being part of the conversation. Raymond stopped at the rear of the car for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was level and quiet and gave nothing away except that he had needed a moment to get it that way. "I thought it was gone," he said. "For 40 years, I thought it was gone." Kane said, "You know this car?" Raymond turned and looked at him directly. "I built it. Started in 1973. Took my chief engineer and me nearly 3 years. We were trying to prove something. A geometry theory Arthur had been working on since before I met him. The map was right, the theory was right, the car was right. He paused. We never got to race it in official competition. Arthur died in April of 1984 during a test session in the desert. And 6 months later, when the team folded and the facility was being cleared, I was told the prototype had been destroyed along with most of the development records. He looked back at the car. I believed it because I needed to stop looking for it. He walked to the driver's side and crouched slowly to look at the B-pillar. He examined it for a long time without touching it. Then he pressed one finger to the stamped signature in the steel and held it there. He stayed that way for what felt like a full minute. Arthur put his mark on everything he built by hand, he said at last. He said a craftsman should sign his work the way a painter signs a canvas. He stood. He was 29 years old. He never saw a single one of his designs race, but what he designed went into the architecture of endurance vehicles for the next 15 years without his name on any of it, because nobody knew where the ideas had come from. He paused. I knew, and I failed to make that known the way I should have. Kane said, "What happened to the car, if it wasn't destroyed?" Raymond shook his head slowly. Someone must have moved it before the facility was cleared, or it was never in the main warehouse. I sent people to look twice in the years after. Eventually, I stopped because the looking was costing more than I could afford to keep spending. Not financially, just. The looking cost something I couldn't keep affording. He looked at Kane steadily. How did you find it? Kane told him. He did not edit the story or give it more drama than it had. He said he had come to the auction for general interest. He said the car had been in the back row, scheduled for the crusher. He said he had noticed the proportions and that the shape of it had made him stop and put his hand on it before he had made any conscious decision to do so. Raymond listened without interrupting. When Kane finished, he asked, "Why did you pay for it?" It looked like nothing from the outside. Kane took his time. There was something in the lines, the way the body was shaped. It didn't look like something that had happened by accident or by catalog. It looked like something someone had thought about for a very long time and then built with their hands. He paused. I don't always know why I know it, but I know it. Now, Raymond looked at him for a moment. Arthur used almost exactly those words the first time he showed me the initial drawings. He said, "This is a shape someone thought about before they built it. You can feel that in a car." He looked at the bodywork. He was right, and apparently it carries. The garage was quiet in a specific way, the particular quiet of a moment by two people simultaneously, and neither of them in a hurry to move past it, and neither of them is in a hurry to move past it. Maya appeared at the garage door. She was in her good shoes and had her sketchbook in one hand. She stood at the threshold, not coming in, just looking. Kane turned and said, "Come here." She came in carefully and stood beside her father. She looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at her. She looked at the car, then at the old man, then back at the car. She said, "We named it Dagger." Raymond's expression changed in a way that was very small but impossible to miss if you were paying attention. He looked at the car. Something moved through his face. He looked back at the girl and said, "That's a good name for it." Maya considered this seriously. "It looks like something that cuts the air," she said. "That's why." Raymond nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something he had already suspected. Valerie stepped forward quietly and opened the portfolio. Inside was a document. 1 page, clean, direct, and at the top of the page a number, $1.2 million. Raymond said, "That reflects what it is and what it represents. I don't negotiate things like this. You can say no, you don't have to answer today." Kane looked at the number. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the car, at the rear quarter panel, at the particular curve of the wheel arch, at the stamp on the pillar that was visible now that the door was open. He did not answer immediately. He spent that evening in the garage after Raymond and Valerie had gone, sitting on the plastic crate, not doing anything in particular. Preston had stayed for an hour and then left because he understood that the conversation that needed to happen was not the one between the two of them. Kane thought about Danny. She had kept a notebook full of sketches, vehicles mostly, but not technical drawings, impression sketches. The way a person draws something they love rather than something they are documenting. There was one shape she had drawn over and over in slightly different versions. A low coupe, steep windshield, rear wheel arches that looked carved rather than pressed. He had looked at that drawing many times without knowing what car she had been drawing from. Now, sitting in the garage with the lamp on and the radio off, he thought that she might not have been drawing from memory at all. She might have been drawing from imagination, imagining something she had only read about in a single, obscure article. In a library archive she had never mentioned to anyone. He thought about the name Maya had given the car without knowing any of this, without knowing about Danny's notebook, without knowing about Arthur Colby or Raymond Whitfield or the Desert Southwest or 1984 or any of it. He picked up his phone and called Valerie Oakes. "I have 2 conditions," he said. "Both of them are non-negotiable. If Mr. Whitfield agrees to both, then yes." She said, "Tell me." "First, the car goes somewhere public, not a private collection, a museum, an institution, somewhere people can walk in off the street and see it. I don't care which one as long as it's accessible." He paused. "Second, Arthur Colby's name's on the information panel in full, and the engineering is explained in plain language, not technical language for enthusiasts. Plain language that a person with no background in racing can read and understand what he built and why it mattered. His name prominently. His works explained honestly." He waited. Valerie said, "I'll relay this to Mr. Whitfield immediately." 8 minutes later, she called back. "He agrees to both conditions. He also wants to add something of his own. He wants Maya's name on the panel as well. The person who named the car should be recorded, because the car has a name now and that name is part of its history." Kane put his hand over his eyes. He sat that way for a while. Then he said, "Tell him I said thank you." The morning the transport came was a weekday, which surprised nobody. 2 technicians from a vehicle conservation service arrived with a purpose-built carrier and attached the support harness with a care that was close to reverence. Kane stood in the driveway and supervised the loading. Celeste came out without anything in her hands. Kane noticed this from across the driveway. It was the first time he could remember seeing her outside without something to hold. A coffee cup, a phone, a prop of normalcy. She walked across the street. She stopped a few feet from him. She started to speak and stopped. Then she started again. "I owe you an apology," she said. "What I said, when you brought it home. About Maya." She stopped. Her hand went to her collarbone. "I didn't know what I was talking about. I almost never do, and I say things anyway, and I'm—" She stopped again. Kane, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something quieter than either of those. "Celeste," he said, "the next time you see someone doing something you don't understand, just wait. Give it a week. See what it becomes before you decide what it is." She did not have an answer for that. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the car being loaded onto the carrier with the particular expression of a person who is watching the specific evidence of a very expensive error in judgment leave the neighborhood forever. "I'm sorry," she said finally. It came out small. "Real." Kane nodded once. He turned back to the car. Behind him, he heard her walk away. Maya had come out the front door and was standing on the porch in her school clothes, watching the carrier back down the street. She raised one hand in a small, formal wave, the kind of wave you give something you are acknowledging rather than someone you expect to wave back. Kane saw it from the corner of his eye. He did not say anything. His throat tightened in a way he had not anticipated, and he stood with it for a moment without moving. The money arrived on a Thursday, 3 weeks later, transferred in a single clean transaction. Kane sat at the kitchen table and looked at the number on his laptop screen for a while. The first call he made was to a legal firm that had been handling his sister's estate. A small remaining matter, a creditor claim that had been unresolved for years, a number that had sat in the background of his finances like a low, unignorable hum. He paid it in full in a phone call that lasted 6 minutes. When he hung up, he sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment. The feeling was not triumph. It was the feeling of a window being opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. Bought Maya new shoes. She had been wearing a pair that were a size too small for 2 months because she had not complained and he had not noticed in time. He bought her a professional sketchbook, the kind with heavy paper and a real binding, because the composition notebooks she had been using were already warping from how hard she pressed. He put money into Preston's shop without discussion of terms. Preston argued on principle for approximately 4 minutes and then accepted, also on principle. They agreed to add a second lift and take on an apprentice. Preston said the apprentice would have to be good. Kane said that was Preston's problem to solve. The rest went into a fund he established through a community foundation, structured to provide financial support for children in foster care or informal guardianship situations whose educational costs were falling through the gaps in existing programs. He did not name the fund after himself. He named it after Danny. He did not attend any ceremony. He sent a letter, signed his name, declined the invitation to speak. 6 weeks later, Valerie Oakes called to invite Kane and Maya to the opening of a new gallery at the California Automotive Heritage Center in Pasadena, a permanent exhibition dedicated to the technical history of American endurance racing. The centerpiece of the gallery was the car, fully restored to what it had looked like in the autumn of 1976 under Arthur Colby's hands, in the deep metallic red that Arthur had reportedly chosen because, according to a note in his own handwriting found in a recovered archive, he believed that a car built to move fast should look like it is already moving when it is standing still. Kane drove them there on a Friday evening. Maya wore her good shoes, the new ones, and brought her sketchbook because she brought it everywhere, and also because she had been planning, for several weeks, to draw the car one more time from life. Raymond was already inside when they arrived. He shook Kane's hand and then crouched down to Maya's level with the careful ease of someone who has been around children enough to know not to talk down to them. He said, "I understand you named her." Maya said, "It looked like a dagger, everything sharp and fast." Raymond said, "That is exactly what Arthur designed it to be." The car was in the center of the gallery under calibrated lighting, suspended on a low platform, the full length of it visible from every approach. It was extraordinary. It looked like what it actually was, a thing designed before its time, hidden for 4 decades, returned to the light in the exact condition its maker had intended, which was moving, even when still. The information panel was mounted on the wall beside it. Arthur Colby's name was large and prominent. The engineering was described in plain language. The geometry theory, the years of work, the influence that had traveled forward through subsequent vehicle designs without attribution for 40 years. Below that, it had been found on a salvage auction by a man who recognized something in its proportions had walked past. And below that, in a final line set apart, this car was named Dagger by Maya Rourke, age 8, who said it looked like something that cuts the air. She was right. Maya stood in front of the car for a long time without moving or speaking. Then she said, without turning around, "Dad, is Dagger happy here?" Kane stood behind her, looking at the car. He thought about Arthur Colby spending years building something he believed in, alone, in the desert, dying before he saw any of it race. He thought about 40 years in a salvage row. He thought about an 8-year-old girl in a garage on a Saturday morning tilting her head at a shape and listening for its name. "I think so," he said. "More people can see it now." Maya nodded. "That's the right place for something good," she said. "Where people can see it." She reached up and took his hand. They stood there together for a while in front of the car in the light. On Waverly Avenue, things continued in the particular way that things continue after a moment of reckoning has moved through a neighborhood and settled. Celeste Harmon did not move out. She did not perform a transformation. What she did was quieter and more durable than either of those things. She stopped speaking before she had finished thinking. It was a small change. The people around her noticed it, though none of them said so directly. She put a note in Kane's mailbox 3 weeks after the gallery opening. It said, "I looked up the exhibition. I read the panel. I'm glad you stopped and looked at it. I'm sorry I wasn't glad at the time." She signed her name, no explanation. Kane read the note at the kitchen counter. He put it in the drawer where he kept things he was not going to throw away. Kane kept the truck. He kept the radio on the shelf between the ratchets and the socket sets. He kept the 5 o'clock mornings and the yellow legal pad on Sunday nights and the Friday evenings in the garage with Preston and the sandwiches and the coffee. He did not become a different person. he became was more settled in the person he had already been, the person who knew with increasing and unshakable certainty that the things worth attending to rarely arrive with announcements. That value and worthlessness are often separated by nothing more than the willingness to stop, to look carefully, and to trust what your hands tell you when you put them on something real. He still talked to Danny sometimes. Not out loud. In the way you continue a conversation with someone who is gone, not from inability to accept the absence, but from the understanding that some conversations don't conclude. They simply change form, he thought. In those quiet moments, that she would have known the car. She would have walked straight to it in the back row of that salvage lot, and put her hand on the rear quarter panel and said, simply, I know this shape. I've always known this shape. He thought she would have loved that Maya named it. He thought she would have approved of the 150. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and reflection. All characters, names, institutions, and events are fictional or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental. This story is not intended to represent any real individual or organization.